Welcome to Build with Bitcoin. I'm co-host Israel Munoz, and today we have another highlights episode. I'm doing this along with Lynn since the beginning of our podcast, and it's one of our favorite formats. We try to do a quick summary and bring up the highlights of the most recent 5 episodes. So, Lynn, who do we have for this set?
We have a great collection. I feel, as I was looking at these episodes, I think 2025 is off to a super strong start. We have 3 VCs packed into 2 episodes. We have Lisa from Base 58 and Bitcoin Plus Plus talking about Bitcoin education. And then we have Steve and Jameson, who are interesting because they're both co-founders of companies and angel investors that are also very significant thought leaders in the Bitcoin space. So we've got a great collection of our first 5 episodes of 2025.
I agree. It's high quality content in these recent 5 episodes. Well, let's get right into it. I mean, maybe we can start with Allen Farrington from Axiom and the Bitcoin economy episode, which is with Time Chain and Ego Death Capital. So this is a VC focused set that we'll start with. And we kicked off the year in 2025 with Allen Farrington from Axiom. He's done some writings which are part of what got him famous as a thought leader in the Bitcoin space. And he's one of the partners at Axiom, which is a venture fund focused on funding early stage Bitcoin startups. Axiom, some of the highlights, very brief from my end, Lynn, were, Allen's. I really enjoyed how he kind of frames the timing of where we're at and how him and as a fund at Axiom, how they look at investing in this protocol and technology stack, right? So it's very clear that they have a long-term time horizon. He even mentions himself, a lot of this tech is kind of TBD, some of these, because they also invest in a lot of the infrastructure for these, potential layer 2 solutions, even outside of Lightning. I think he made mention to, is it ARC?
The ARC protocol?
Yeah, the new layer 2 protocol. So, all that to say, his framing of the timing of where we're at, I think is very valuable because he specifically kind of mentions we completely avoid price action. We try specifically not to think about the price because we are in this infrastructure stage of the technology. And he has a very long-term thinking approach as a VC, as it should be, right? And he does a great job also explaining how he communicates this approach with his LPs. What did you take from that conversation?
Yeah, and I've been, I enjoy Allen's writing so much. He's the author of the co-author of the book Bitcoin as Venice, and a number of just very fascinating explorations into Bitcoin as kind of a philosophical, how it's going to change the future. And he, I think what and our talk did go into a lot of the philosophy, but Allen comes originally from a capital markets background and then was responsible for making a couple of Bitcoin investments inside of that large fund, including Blockstream. But he really views Bitcoin as having the potential, or Bitcoin companies of having the potential of remaking the capital markets infrastructure and energy company infrastructure. And so his framing, he sees parallels between the development and evolution of the internet protocol and the development and evolution of the Bitcoin protocol. And so as a technology stack for remaking pretty much everything having to do with value transfer in a digital world. And so his premise is that all companies will eventually be Bitcoin companies. And just like we no longer say, Google is an internet company or whatever, it's like pretty soon every company will have a touch point into the Bitcoin protocol at some level. And we're very, very early in that, just as the early times of the internet. But, I think this gives him, he's reluctant to tie down, what their fund is looking at because he thinks that there's so many different opportunities. But, I love hearing the way he sees it. I think you're correct in identifying the fact that his vision is very long-term, very broad, and very Bitcoin centric. So that makes him an ideal investor for a lot of these companies. And they're raising a second fund pretty quickly after their first fund. And, the portfolio companies they have included in Axiom just show the network that he's been able to build. And, It was a great conversation about what we look at in the future. And the other thing that, we talked about in that conversation with him is just VC on a broader scale. And we had a little bit of a deep dive into the thought of exits, for Bitcoin companies, which you and I talk about often, and we've talked about with a number of a few other VCs that, the venture capital space with Bitcoin companies and on a Bitcoin standard may look very different than traditional venture capital looks today, where increasingly the pressure is to a quick exit, whether that be tokenization or private market shares, but VC funds are under such pressure from their limited partners, their investors, to generate returns after all the money that's been poured into the venture capital space, that under a Bitcoin standard, it may look very different, where the companies may not have a traditional form of exit, but might in fact rethink how investment returns are paid back to their investors through some variation of Bitcoin dividends or shares in the company that is generating Bitcoin as their underlying revenue stream. So we have a lot of, I think, exciting ideas to explore, and Allen brings this up in our conversation with him.
And one other point that I think is interesting from the conversation is his perspective on raising LP funds. Let's just maybe generalize it into two buckets: family office type of institution, and then more pension fund, larger, more bureaucratic type institution. He says that most of the money is still coming from the more agile group of the two, which is maybe the family offices or high net worth individuals. And it just resonates so much with me with what we're seeing across the board with Bitcoin adoption. I mean, I think the education is penetrating all wealth managers, Wall Street companies. He brings an interesting perspective on his own, from Axiom, experience in talking with, the big money out there. But, all to be expected, I think, as far as just the more agile tend to be early adopters of any technology, right? And that goes.
Yeah. And that brings us to the second episode that we'll highlight this time, which was the Bitcoin economy. And this was a conversation with two different VCs that we've talked to before, Nico Lechuga from Ego Death Capital and Alex Mann from Time Chain. And so that was an event. You talked about an event that you attended, Israel. So I'm going to let you kind of take the lead on this conversation. But specifically to bring together family office investors, they're both raising or adding to their funds and their fundraise. So it's exciting to see so much new money being generated to support the Bitcoin innovation ecosystem. But tell us about that event, and tell us about a little bit about your takeaways from our conversation with Nico and Alex.
Yeah, definitely encourage everyone interested in venture capital to listen to this episode, because you kind of get 2 in 1 as well, right? But that event specifically, Lynn, I mean, what a fantastic event that they put together. It was called the Bitcoin economy. It was in January of this year, January 2025. And they just had such fantastic content and a great lineup of speakers. So it was a smaller event. It was, as far as the audience, mostly family office, high net worth type of perspective investor. They had the entire Ego Death team, the Time Chain team, is along with the partners that came over from Denmark. It was incredible. They kicked it off with a special guest who doesn't like to be too public, so I'll leave it at that. But a very special guest. And then they went through at this event in January, they went through first explaining Bitcoin's relevance as an asset and why this asset class is so important in the macro picture. And so you had some of the best speaking along about all of that. They had Preston Pish go through Michael Saylor's 3-minute MicroStrategy presentation, but unpacked it in 30 minutes. You had Lynn Alden speaking to the macro side. You had Jeff Booth explaining why this new protocol is so revolutionary, and how it's more than a technology, the profound nature of a protocol and how it tends to build in layers. And then you had, of course, Nico and Alex Mann, who got into the venture side, right? So the role of venture capital in this future Bitcoin economy, which is the main focus of this episode. All that to say, I mean, just fantastic content in there. And in the episode that we did with Alex and Nico, I mean, you just get such a great look into two of the top funds in the space. First of all, how they're looking at portfolio construction, how they actually work hand in hand with these founders, right? And what they're seeing as far as the areas of opportunity within the Bitcoin ecosystem. And not only that, but they speak specifically to some of the extremely positive success stories of some of these early companies from their first funds. They're moving on to their second funds now, given the success of the first funds. But I mean, some of the results are pretty extraordinary for venture capital, early stage companies, right? I mean, you have some companies moving into the profitability cycle at pre-seed, seed stage. I mean, it's a very interesting episode as far as getting a look into Bitcoin founders and Bitcoin startups within venture capital. But Lynn, I mean, I'm sure you have plenty of thoughts on this one.
No, but I love yes, a lot of the content included in this episode about the Bitcoin economy makes it worthwhile to listen to. But I especially like their thoughts about venture capital in the Bitcoin space and the founders that they identified. And I tell you, we're really, really early in Bitcoin venture capital. I think we are seeing indications of early returns that are going to show that, we always talk about the cost of capital is Bitcoin, which has had such a tremendous appreciation over the 15 years of its existence. But, when you look at what the potential is for some of these companies that are building around the Bitcoin ecosystem and providing the infrastructure, I think they will, meet or exceed those returns. And it just makes logical sense. So I do love their explorations of what makes a founder in the Bitcoin ecosystem different in the way they think and the way they operate than traditional early stage tech, and just their perspectives of how they handle their portfolio construction and the conversation of Bitcoin treasuries in early stage companies. So these are all great observations. What I especially liked, and you and I talked about this after the episode, is these are two competing VC firms, competing, quote unquote, but just to see the synergy, the respect that they clearly have for each other in the conversation, the way they think differently, the friendship they've obviously developed over working on these companies together and sharing board seats. And I loved seeing how just the great vibe between these two, between Alex and Nico, and obviously two of the top firms in the space. So it makes me really optimistic to think about the evolution of venture capital support for Bitcoin companies when you look at these two leaders in early stage Bitcoin venture capital.
Yeah, and they are both very good venture investors as well. So, definitely have a listen for a little more details and insight into how they're looking at the space. But yeah, it's so true. And they kind of mentioned that as well, right? They also say, I mean, we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't believe that we do have a good chance at exceeding the hurdle rate, which there, of course, any VC fund investing in the Bitcoin space is very conscious of the fact that it's a high bar to exceed the Bitcoin returns, right? The asset. But of course they're in this because they believe in the massive opportunity of the companies that are building on that protocol. And, maybe just to round it off, it reminds me of at the Bitcoin economy event in January, I'm not sure if it was a current or prospective LP that kind of just framed it so well. I think he said, do I believe in Bitcoin? Yes. Then that logically leads me to believe that there's going to be an entire economy and set of companies that are going to be using this protocol. So do I believe in that? Absolutely. And is this the team that I believe is going to execute and has the network to identify these opportunities? And I just thought the framing of it was so simple and logical that it's worth mentioning. With that, maybe we move on to we steer a different direction with the episode with Lisa and Neigut, which was also a very interesting conversation. So Lisa's the founder of Base 58 and BTC++. She's a very well-respected educator and developer in the space. I know you had already had a little more contact with Lisa before, Lynn, but for me, it was a very special conversation because, she just has such a fresh perspective on the development going on in Bitcoin and the education of interested developers, and how you don't need much besides basic engineering to learn about how Bitcoin transactions work and contribute to the tech stack as well. And of course, her opinion on the innovation going on in Bitcoin was very interesting. But maybe what were your takes from that conversation?
Yeah, I'm really thrilled that we were able to highlight Lisa and the work that she's doing, because here we're talking about venture capital and investing in the Bitcoin ecosystem and infrastructure. But you know what that takes? In addition to founders, it takes developers, it takes engineering talent, it takes people to actually build the product. And I think, especially in recent years, a lot of engineering talent has been directed toward AI or toward other technology companies. And there's not a lot of awareness of what is the tech stack education that you need in order to build in the Bitcoin protocol. And so Lisa is probably one of the leaders. I mean, there's a handful of them, but she certainly is among the top that is putting her time and effort and energy into educating Bitcoin developers and bringing the developers together in the Bitcoin plus plus conferences around the world, that they share ideas. In her conference series, she takes certain concepts in each of the different locations, and they'll take a deep dive into different protocol enhancements or aspects of it. And then, nothing like brainstorming and sharing ideas together to bring it further on. And then her Base 58 is a training platform, online and in person, that helps people get basic education or understanding about what it takes to enter the Bitcoin development ecosystem. So, I really applaud the efforts. It's people like Lisa who are going to be so essential to the space being built out and innovation continuing in Bitcoin, because these are the ones who secure the blockchain while also providing the capabilities of creating innovation on top of it through different layers or different protocol changes or enhancements. So really, really enjoyed the conversation with Lisa. And the one thing that kind of stood out from the conversation of, we talk to everybody really about why they're so attracted to the protocol. And Lisa, when she first became interested in moving from her traditional developer background into focusing on Bitcoin, was how she viewed that Satoshi had solved the problem of protocol design and incentive design. And I think that's a really important way to look at it, is just so many of the differentiators of Bitcoin as a technology have to do with the incentive design, about why you're creating something the way you're creating it. And I thought that was a lovely aspect of just how she looks at it, and where she's kind of leading the thought process of all these developers coming together, is to ensure that the technology and the incentives remain true to the original ethos of the Bitcoin white paper.
She mentions some of the success metrics of both Base 58 and BTC++. So, I mean, you can tell there's certainly appetite and growing appetite for everything she's doing to educate the developers in the Bitcoin industry. Base 58, she speaks to how that's available fully online, so that's very accessible content. I believe she mentioned it's on Udemy, that she has those classes, and she goes through that background of Base 58 and also the curriculum specifically. So if you're interested in knowing, what kind of content, if you have any interest at all in gaining some skills on the development side of Bitcoin, she does a great job going through exactly what you'll get out of the curriculum in this episode and how that program has grown. And then on the BTC++ side, she's taking that conference kind of globally, really. I mean, US, LATAM, Europe. I believe this month she was in Florianopolis in Brazil, and then
this weekend, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they had a live stream of it, including the hackathon. So this morning last night they announced the hackathon winners. So anyone who's interested, you can follow them on Twitter and see some of the videos, and I'm sure it'll be up on YouTube too. But so these are things that she also makes accessible to everybody. So if you can't attend in person, you can also track what innovation is occurring and the ideas and kind of follow this group of innovators that are gathering together in different parts of the world throughout the year.
Yeah. So whether it's in person or online, through Lisa's resources, there's plenty of ways to get involved on the development or technical side of Bitcoin. So encourage anyone interested in that topic to certainly have a listen. Lisa's great. She's a head full of knowledge. That takes us to the last category of our highlights, which is these are two also phenomenal episodes. Let's start with Stephen Cole, and then we'll get into Jameson Lopp. And we categorize them in the same bucket because they both have experience as angel investors and as co-founders of the company that they're currently building. So in Stephen's case, starting with that episode, Stephen is co-founder of Orchestra, and he was before co-founding Orchestra, a very active angel investor. And he has a fascinating background, and he tells his entire story of what got him to the point of wanting to be very thoughtful and dedicated to investing in early stage technology. And of course, to starting eventually Orchestra, which is a very recent startup project that he's a co-founder with Joel Almeida on this company that's basically facilitating Bitcoin purchases, but in a very simple and intuitive model for, maybe mom and pop shops is their current focus, or SMEs just generally. And they recognize, some of the pain points and demands for this category, and they constructed a solution to essentially just be able to allocate a percentage of your revenues, understanding that those revenues fluctuate month to month. It's kind of meant to be a set it and forget it solution for these businesses. So if I want to allocate, 1% or 5% of my revenues to Bitcoin, they're providing a platform that makes that very simple and automated. Stephen, for me, Lynn, he was a very, very interesting person to speak to, because I think he has a very good balance of the investment and co-founder of this company, those two mindsets. And he gets into one of my favorite points that he speaks to, is how he views, and he's had this, thesis for a long time, that he views his savings. He's a pure Bitcoin savings guy, right? So he speaks to the fact that that's been his savings technology for a long time. And he doesn't view it as an investment, as, maybe many people new to the space view. Oh, I'm going to invest in Bitcoin, right? He's very clear that for him, that's just the clear savings technology, period. And his investing side is early stage startups, right? So it's a very, very interesting mix. What were some of your thoughts from that?
Yeah, no, I noted that too, and really liked that differentiator. And he also, came to be co-founder of Orchestra after investing with them and after investing in a number of Bitcoin companies for many years. So I love his journey about the intentional path to angel investing and wanting to do this after a career in tech. So, he had been involved in managing tech teams and different other projects. And so he's got a really great perspective of how successful companies build and exit. And then he's taking this to the Bitcoin space first as an angel investor, and then finding one company he really believed in so much he wanted to be part of the founding team. But I think also, we're recording this on February 24th. And one of the parts of the conversation that when re-listening to it over the weekend, really stood out to me was just talking about, he, like Allen, talked about the parallels in the development of the Bitcoin protocol to the internet protocol, and how in the early journey of his, he invested in a number of different protocols across crypto and Web3, and looked at the technologies that each was bringing to the table, but came back to just having a single focus on Bitcoin, and talked about that, sometimes adding complexity or adding, functionality doesn't make it better. It actually just increases the attack surface or problems with the blockchain. And we saw this with the Ethereum blockchain over the weekend with the major hack from North Korea. And right now, the protocol is determining if they roll back the protocol in order to erase that hack. or if they keep it, true to a blockchain where you shouldn't be doing that. But it just underscores the centralized decision-making process of the Ethereum blockchain. And even though technically, and he talks about the technical decentralization versus social decentralization in our conversation. And I think this is just such an important distinction that when we had this conversation, it wasn't as clear as it is today that Bitcoin is the only technology and the only blockchain that is just truly decentralized in both a technical way and a social way. And Ethereum, being the number 2 digital asset or token out there, is decentralized in terms of technology, but not in terms of a socialization or decision-making process, because whether or not, whatever the decision they reach, they have the ability to make that decision. And I think that just shows how Bitcoin stands apart from it and why Steve and all of us here have decided to focus on the technology and the protocol that we feel offers the greatest opportunity going forward. So that was, I think, just the timing of that, but also noting the parallels of the conversation between Steve and Allen, and just talking about how they view this in a big picture space and what the potential is for innovation in Bitcoin. And he also makes the point that, you can add different other sets and features to Bitcoin as we progress through layer 2 development, but you can never add, the immutability or the social decentralization to some of these other Web3 or crypto projects. I think for anyone exploring this space and being confused about all of the different options out there and what so many venture capital funds and traditional tech are investing in, perhaps they're just not looking at the true core of where we should be going with this. So love the conversation with Steve. I mean, there's so much in there in so many ways, and he has such a beautiful way of expressing his thoughts in such a clear way. And I'll just close it out by saying, he talked about his path to learning was really through meetups and the importance of meetups, just the in-person context that you meet from both an educational standpoint, building your individual network. He's identified opportunities for investment through these meetups. So, and I underscore that. I think, the community of Bitcoin is so important to all of it. So I really loved his focus on encouraging participating in meetups.
Yeah, and he's a very well-versed technology investor. So in his angel investing journey, he's invested in lots of different aspects of deep tech, not just Bitcoin. So that takes us to the last episode of the set, which is Jameson Lopp, co-founder at Casa, and one of the security experts that are out there in Bitcoin, right? And along that, one of the main educators in the Bitcoin, in the Bitcoin space. And, Jameson just has such a pure Bitcoin as a protocol and as a decentralized protocol, what it means to the sovereign individual, that it makes the conversation with Jameson quite special. Maybe I'll hand it off to you, Lynn. Why don't you get us started with what you thought of that episode?
Well, I mean, starting from the perspective that for many, many years, I have enormous respect for Jameson and for all that he contributes to the ecosystem in terms of education and especially around security and securing your Bitcoin and how he has contributed to it through Casa, through creating a solution. But yeah, and he talks about, I mean, I guess we should, as a starting point, he frames it like, are you in Bitcoin for the number go up technology or for freedom go up technology? And so, I mean, you can see throughout the conversation that the importance of self-sovereignty and freedom and owning your own asset is core to his beliefs. And he talks about the fact that, from the white paper, that, one of the central aspects of it was that you lose many of the benefits of Bitcoin when you trust a third party to hold it. And we're seeing the proliferation of that with the ETFs and with, I think we'll increasingly see other financial instruments tied to Bitcoin that give you exposure to the price of appreciation of Bitcoin, but it doesn't give you the benefits of peer-to-peer, true peer-to-peer, permissionless exchange of value that Bitcoin was designed to provide. And so that's his kind of foundational thinking and why he, went on to create Casa with Nick Newman. And that is one of the first solutions to provide an easier way. I think many people are very intimidated by, how you secure your own Bitcoin and your own keys on your own devices. And so Casa provides a more comfortable way for many people to do that, but still includes everything from inheritance planning, sets for corporate tools for investing in Bitcoin or for sovereign nations to invest in Bitcoin in a way that provides kind of the comfort level of who's actually controlling it. So, but our conversation with Jameson just goes all over, the different touch points around security from both, you're making sure that your Bitcoin is able to be passed to your heirs. It's not able to be taken from you, to just securing yourself. And what I thought was interesting was after this conversation, you and I both individually, we were chatting and we talked about it, made us, reevaluate like what we're doing on our own level in terms of VPNs and how we've communicated to our, to whoever will be receiving our Bitcoin if we get hit by a bus or whatever. But it's just like, it's a great conversation that just really makes you think about, it's great to invest in Bitcoin, but, what does that entire trajectory look like? So what did you take away from it?
Yeah, I do appreciate how Jameson is kind of staying true to the origins of Bitcoin, right? If you're taking the responsibility to someone else, aka trusting a third party, then you're losing many of the benefits that Bitcoin was created for, right? Which is precisely to not have to trust in third parties. So, I mean, he just stays very true to the sovereign nature of Bitcoin. He speaks very well to why that's so important. And for him, you can tell he's staying true to his principles, right? In building Casa. And he speaks precisely to that, right? That he wants to make it easy if you're ready as an individual or as a business, whoever you are, if you're ready and want to take responsibility for handling your own custody and economic freedom, then Casa is there to make it as simple as that can be, right? Which is just a very welcomed and refreshing perspective. So I just really, I'd admire his principled approach to his company building, right? I mean, this is a guy who clearly values highly sovereignty and security. And it's interesting as well that he mentions how robust, I mean, just from the technology standpoint, forget ideology or, principles. Let's put that aside for a second. It's very interesting to mention how from the technology side, actually Bitcoin being a digital commodity in nature, that allows for different models of security that are actually more robust and supersede a lot of what we think of in our minds, which is, vault, security guards, I don't know, maybe some bunker in Switzerland. What we typically think of as the highest standard of security, Jameson explains how that's challenged with the use of Bitcoin's technology and how it actually is, it's capable of being a more robust security setup that is allowed through the digital nature of Bitcoin. Well, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was especially, you pointed that out, and we have a clip on X, but with all these conversations about is the gold really in Fort Knox, it's like the fact that you can track on the chain and see where your Bitcoin is, but also really secure it in a way that's probably more secure than Fort Knox. So that was a great conversation. I pulled one other comment that Jameson made, and this shifts gears a little bit, but we asked him for advice for Bitcoin companies. And, we talk a lot on our podcast about corporate treasuries for Bitcoin startups and what a benefit that is. And he said, even if it's really hard, in an early stage, he said to try and build your corporate Bitcoin treasury as early as possible, because he called it a cheat code for extending your runway. And we had conversations about Bitcoin treasury with Nico and Alex in the episode, and also even with Allen. And, and we generally get into this conversation with investments, and it is a little bit of a dance, but Jameson was, just their experience at Casa. He said they always received Bitcoin as payment. And so they put a part of it in, which is part of the business of orchestra from Steve, is just, how you can put even a little percentage of your earnings into Bitcoin and just what a difference that can make over a long time. So I love, hearing these different perspectives from, this is from the founder perspective. And, and I think sometimes founders that have experienced Bitcoin price appreciation with their Bitcoin treasury, are disproving some of the natural tendencies toward caution because of the Bitcoin price volatility that an investor might have. But yeah, interesting little tidbit there from Jameson.
Yeah, and it can really be such a powerful tool I like when we revisit this from different perspectives because it just comes up again and again, and it will continue to come up. And you're right, Jameson does a very clear job of saying, whenever you can as a startup, start building some sort of treasury in Bitcoin.
The other thing, and we put Steve and Jameson together in kind of our analysis because they both are co-founders. They both have been involved with angel investing, and they're both long-term thought leaders. I mean, Jameson is really he's been in Bitcoin for years and years. And I do want to point out his extensive resources available for free on his website that we'll reference, but with all kinds of tutorials and resource lists for learning everything about security to self-custody to just general Bitcoin education. But they're very different in their personalities. Couldn't be more different, I think, but also how they approach angel investing, where Steve has been incredibly intentional and has built a thought process. As you mentioned, he looks at Bitcoin as a savings technology and investing in Bitcoin companies as his investment philosophy. And Jameson is investing in venture funds and Bitcoin focused venture funds and companies on a different basis. He said, I've gotten so much out of Bitcoin. I want to contribute back to the ecosystem. So, and he said, if I get nothing out of these investments, it's okay. I know that I'm helping support the growth of the ecosystem. So his viewpoint is very different. But he's still making significant investments, I think, across different and supporting companies in a different way. And so I love seeing the two, rationales or reasons why people are supporting investing and how they come to it. So I don't know what you thought about that aspect.
Yeah, no, I love that, Lynn, because it is a very different take to the same, to the same concept. And they're both very valuable conversations in their own right. And maybe the last thing I'll say to round off the Jameson conversation, which I think is noteworthy, is Jameson's perspective on should Bitcoin, the protocol from the base layer, continue to innovate or not. And I think Jameson's point is just worth the listen, regardless of what side you stand on regarding that debate. He basically says, let's recognize it's the life cycle of any protocol like this. It will harden or ossify. But he does believe that we should continue pushing for improvements and innovation because there are still attack vectors down the line. A balanced and prudent, I believe, approach that he takes to this ossification conversation. But that's the last point that I think is worth, kind of highlighting from that conversation.
Yeah, but in closing, we have 5 amazing episodes. I think the year's off to a strong start and innovation. I mean, these conversations combined really highlight what's possible in innovation in the Bitcoin protocol and what's happening. And we're excited to share it with you. And so we look forward to more conversations in the future, but hope you enjoyed this highlight episode. Thanks for listening to the Build with Bitcoin podcast. If you found benefit in what you heard in this episode, we'd truly appreciate it if you would like, share, or leave a comment on whichever platform you're listening, as this helps others find us, which is especially important for a new podcast. And as a reminder, our content is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not to be considered investment advice or a recommendation to invest in any company or asset mentioned in the podcast. Build with Bitcoin is a proud affiliate partner of River, a full-service, 100% reserve custody, Bitcoin-only financial services company. For your next Bitcoin purchase, use our exclusive link, partner.river.com/buildwithbitcoin. Thank you sincerely for being a part of the Build with Bitcoin community.